think we'll wait until we get...
To be here, no? I mean,
Okay, so just tell me what you think of the site, you know, the harbour location and how it's going to fit, the Cinematheque's going to fit in with it.
I think this is probably the most important idea, because anything which should be done at the museum should be part of the quay and part of a larger urban proposal who connects the things. I think in no way should be like a corner building with historical or not historical problems. I think that in this place, as everybody knows, the same construction of the opera changes, and it was one of the buildings that in a way put the place in a kind of global situation, no? So in a way it's the kind of place that when you come here, in a way or another, you think that you have been, no? It's one of these kind of dream places, no? And also the thing I was really impressed is really the city activity in terms of communication, harbor, taxi, harbor, ferries, boats. I think that makes probably us, let's say in Europe, let's say as crowded as Venice, no? I mean,
how should a contemporary museum fit into this context?
I think, and that was very clear during the interview, during the conversation with the committee, I understood a lot of things, because this process is a lot about the conversation and it's people that had a lot of ideas, and I think what they really know, and I think that's fantastic, is that a museum is not a building. I think it's a kind of activity, it's the production of ideas, and in a way what they are doing is this kind of, I hope what we will do is this kind of process in which conversation and activities becomes a construction in a fantastic specific site, but will not be like the opera that in a way, let's say the activity was generated by the building itself, no? And the site here, I think it's an important, you could say, social content in the whole thing from the beginning, no?
As a site, of course, this is one of the most recognisable sites in Australia.
And in the world, yes.
So how do you, as an architect, deal with that as a concept, particularly, you know?
I think I've been also working in different, not only in Spain, in Japan and other places, and I think the best you could do is to act, let's say, with a kind of hidden sense of responsibility, but be very natural. I mean, like almost if you, without being arrogant, I mean, almost if you have the freedom to think out of the overwhelming possibility of the site, then because of the overwhelming power of the site is so important, that in a natural way will influence your design. I think it will be bad to start making some ideas that really say, here is the opera, here I am, that is the bay. I think in a way we should start working with the same naturality that the first people that came here. I'm saying that really without being arrogant. It's just try to be as free as possible, no? And it's what we discussed during the interview, that was talking about ideas most of the time.
Specifically, how does a foreigner like yourself deal with such an Australian setting?
I mean, with a big desire of learning from it. But I think this thing of being foreigner, when you are inside of the profession, you know that through the communication and through professional magazines, etc., in a way you know each other. I've been meeting people here that I've been meeting them everywhere else, or a lot of the architects we've been choosing, we know each other quite well. I met here, I propose as my collaborators people who has been my former student in Germany. So I think at this moment and this kind of traveling and personal, not only publications, but personal communication is an important part of our work. So I don't feel a stranger. So I am. But
what do you feel when you come into a site like this with such a sort of, such a vista?
I mean, but of course it's special. But I was telling when you need to be an architect, and it's very difficult to express it in English because it will sound banal. You need to be a bit cool, let's say, no? Of course, it's very, I'm saying a kind of lie, no? But it's better not to pretend. Is the most important thing, no? Is is in a way something that should be very precise, should be understood very well what the committee is thinking about, and really for me much more better than the brief they sent it to me, all these kind of things, was the long conversation during a day, and then following the conversation during dinner, and I think that was, is the real first time that I understood what is about the thing, no?
Well, and there's the building there.
Yeah.
How do you deal with the sort of heritage elements of that sort of building?
I think in that sense, probably in your context is more special, but in my context, the heritage situation, it's the everyday situation. I think now I'm working a lot in center of cities, in Utrecht, in Holland, and in the same Barcelona, and the buildings which have no heritage, let's say, regulations, I'm asking for being kept. I think it's no contradiction in between new buildings and all things built. I think everything is part of the same material. No, the problem is when this kind of law and the excessive pressure about image came. No, but I think from the way of using buildings, there's no contradiction in between the past and the present. Let's say I like to say that every 95 building is present. Doesn't matter when it was built, but I think if it arrives nowadays, it's as present as this boat. No?
But you have to work with the heritage in this case.
But that is better. I mean, you are not alone. You could make conversations, and I think for me it's much more easier. It will be much more difficult to really start in the desert. No? I mean, really, I think that the city pressure is something good for buildings. I mean.
Great. Thank you. All right. Enrico, so tell me again about this building and working with the heritage. I mean, you're going to have to work with heritage here with this site.
Yes, but no, when we were talking before that in a way heritage here could be understood as a kind of exception. Most of all, if you think about heritage as a kind of listed building or whatever. But in my way of work, let's say my condition of working in Europe, I think heritage is the normal condition. I mean, a lot of city center is preserved, and I think. Also, I'm working in the City Hall in Utrecht, which is a heritage building in the city center of Barcelona, in the market, and even the buildings which are not heritage listed. In a way, I feel the same in relation to them. I think, and I was joking about this, but it's my feeling that every building that had been able to survive and arrive until 1997. It's a modern building. I mean, the way we use it, the materials have been able to survive, the forms, but I will say, from a realistic point of view, is not any old buildings. All is useful material, and I like it very much to work with it. No? And in that sense, the shot from here is very nice because it makes the building really what it is, not an isolated part of history, but really a kind of complex reality. I mean, it's clear.
So is it easier then, in a sense, to work with a building with an existing structure?
I think so. I mean, because I also understand this process has a lot to do with conversation. No? I mean, conversation, it's a process that never been alone. It's been the kind of force behind, it's been the kind of committee, the curators. But I'm sure the only way to do this building is with a broad conversation with the city, with the same idea of public space, should be a public space important building. So in a way, let's say the conversation with the physical thing, which is some kind of windows and ordered limestone or sandstone, then it's part of the process. I feel, for me, it's in a way easier than starting from zero.
Obviously, without giving away too much, but what are you going to do here?
I mean, I told you that I think it's not the place, and it will not be fair, but probably one of the ideas that I've been, because let's say the committee was very much really having a dialogue and was not coming and telling, I'm going to do this. I think that was never asked in the brief, and I think the process is much more rich because also they have a lot of ideas about how the thing should be. But my proposal was basically in two directions. One is the coherence with the public space. I think it's, and also probably is my speciality. We were saying that a building is never an object where you go there to meet. Probably it's much more interesting to work in a kind of like a constellation way in which different things happening make that place interesting, or a kind of place that you remember more than this kind of toy or this kind of cupola or whatever. No? And the second part is about mobility. I think mobility is a concept that was not in the brief, but I think it's quite important. Not only the mobility of the people going, but the same mobility of the activities, the same building, and it was maybe the two more important concepts.
So by mobility you mean interacting with the movement of the city?
Yes, but a bit more even. But that will be the next chapter of the history if the thing goes ahead. I think I told you that will not be fair to really explain in public the ideas. I think the committee, what the process is about is also they get this feedback with different people, and probably they will really re-elaborate the thoughts, and if the thing goes ahead, which I will be much more than happy, then will be a second step and a second thought. So I think at the moment the process is quite curious. It's like if somebody tell us what's your opinion, and then they will collect it, re-elaborate it, and bring it back to some of us. No? And probably even the architect who is going to do will be enriched by other people ideas and conversations. I'm sure. It's a bit painful for the ones that will lose the opportunity, but I'm sure the whole process will be enriched about of that. And the committee insists very much on the generosity that we all should put on the thing. So I'm playing the game, and I'm happy to do it.
A Cinematheque is about moving pictures as well.
Yes.
So presumably that
exactly, yes. But I think the only hint I could give it to you is it was something thinking about this movie by Peter Bogdanovich named Targets. So it's the only hint I could give to you.
Okay. You come from Barcelona, which of course was an Olympic city. How does that impact on the sort of public works and architecture of a city?
Probably in a similar way than here. Of course, is that it's one of these energetic moments in which the very clear schedule programming in a very broad scale happens. So in a way, there is a lot of concentration of events. And then also, I think like the MCA, it's this kind of other events which are probably on the periphery of the main event, but probably will have a longer and better effect on the city. No, I think the Olympic movement at the end, what makes it's a kind of general awakening. Everybody's trying to fit in that date, and then the ones who are able to surpass the date and keep going, which I think is the case of the museum, probably will be very important.
So does it affect the way you look at projects?
No, because I mean, most probably when you are inside of the precise moment, maybe yes, because of the hurry and everything. But the Olympics were in '92 in Barcelona. We did the project like 3-4 years ago. It's almost 10 years since then, and then you always, when you look back to the work, the only thing, at least in Spain, you are surprised at how fast everything was, no? But I think every professional follow his own career, I think in a way independent of that event, because an event of such a big importance happens very few times in your life, no? Maybe only one, and by chance. No?
It might sound like a silly question, but what is a Cinematheque?
I think the nice thing is that nobody knows, and I think this is a very clear strategy in a way. Is asking you a question with no answer, no, and in a way pretending that we know. So it's this kind of game which is in a way like the emperor's clothes, no, and then we keep going ahead guessing, no, and I think I've been surprised. It's the first time that I go through a kind of discussion of this kind, but I will say the game is very fair, and see what happens. But I think this is a bit the question, and at least my opinion was that it was not the precise moment to answer it. I think what I think the process, as I understand, is like try to keep everything open until a certain moment in which you close the things and you go very fast. No? And I think this moment about the closing and taking decisions has not yet arrived. It will very soon, probably when in the next weeks when the committee will decide it's enough, let's say, background of thoughts that. Because of course, but there is very nice things in the brief, because they ask you for a Cinematheque in a very subtle way that you have different kind of rooms. So in a way, of course, you could go from the most rational and conventional way of showing cinema into something that it's completely, let's say, in a way, when I like it to think about the future, I like always to think a lot about the past. Because if you think how the starting of cinema starts, no? And if you think in the first cinemas, in a way it's, of course, not the same, but in many ways it's what we are aiming, no? In a way that the cinema could happen everywhere, that the image is much more related to this kind of normal way of dealing with objects and things that become maybe less specialized than this kind of industry which is so perfect. No? And I think it's nice this kind of feedback into the past to see how the things are connected. No? And I think this is a bit implied on the brief, but as you see, the conversation was very free. No?
Is the Cinematheque as a museum or as a showcase for art, is it essentially different from an art house or an art museum? Or?
Of course, all the institutions at the end, they have a lot of similarities, but let's say when you start a commission, let's say if they tell you they have 3 Rembrandts, 2 Goyas, then your thoughts will be very different, and they think we are start thinking on a place where the image has the advantage that is no doubt about originality. No, I think in museums and collections is always this kind of fight for originality, which is the most important painting of that painter, which only has one and is maybe in Louvre, I don't know where. And I think here it makes no sense to enter this competition. And I think that kind of, let's say, move into the image completely abandon this kind of debate about collections, about originality, about work of art. You are thinking much more on something that is reproduced, every piece is original, and I think it's a very intelligent move. No? We will see where it leads, no? But I think it's very interesting.
I'll just ask you quickly, just once again, because I think we may not have got the sound or the picture right, but obviously this site is very important to Australia. It is the public image of Australia. How does that affect the way you deal with it?
I mean, I will try not to ruin it, no? And I think that's a lot. I think once an architect which I respect very much gave me an advice which I found it fantastic. When you do something in one place, the only thing you should be careful is not to leave it worse than it was before, no? And I think that will be something. And of course, the architecture is not as difficult as everybody says. The problem is that it's always engaged with a lot of problems and contradictions, but I think the conditions of this building, in terms of how the client work and how, I'm sure it's going to be okay and will not ruin the place, on the contrary.
On that point, I'm sure you're aware of the controversy surrounding this building in East Circular.
Yes, this is probably going to ruin the place.
Yeah, what do you think of this development?
I mean, of course, from the distance and not knowing the reality of the problem, the only thing I could think is that it's better not to do it. But this capacity sometimes, when you judge reality from inside, this kind of, let's say, dealings and you should offer something in change of something, and then probably in a much more broad sense, it's not so easy to be critical. But always I like to mention this tale by Bartleby, the writer, by Melville. Maybe you know that he was this clerk working, and always every time the boss comes there and tells, could you do something? And then he always says, yes, but I would rather not. So I think this capacity to resist at every stage is quite important. And I'm sure even building in that part of the opera, a lot of modifications and resistance could be done in order that something that maybe for a lot of reasons need to be built could be modified along the process. And I think that will be important.
That's great. Anything else I would suggest was you might have
saw it when you first were given the brief and when you actually came here?
You will not believe it, but architecture is a quite scientific profession, and of course when there is a lot of things which are very important about the knowledge of the building, which is when you, I'm sure probably it's the same like writers, or I'm sure about the plans and about the knowledge about how the things are built. Let's say you understand a lot, and for me, let's say I prefer to have a much more analytical study of a place than just come there and say, oh, that I will do I don't know what. No, then I prefer always that the intuitions are controlled, but much more much more, let's say, technical knowledge, no? And then, of course, you came, but then when you came, I think what is important is not as much the building is people opinions, attitudes, and then all these kind of things is what really makes you discover the aims behind, and then more than really thinking that I don't believe in this kind of artists or architects that they go say, oh, this should be a bit higher or more into the left. No, not at all. I think what really you discover coming to the place is the air, let's say, what is the people, the thinkings, and that starts modifying your approach to the thing. No? But I think architecture feelings are always previous to any form. No? And I think it's that deep thing that is modified when you came to the place, but more, let's say, by knowing the real conditions and the real people, not precisely the place. I think this place, I mean specifically this place, is being described, that could be described very well. I mean, I'm sure when the first time you get to New York, this was my first opinion, so I thought, wow, it's like the movies, no? So, and you then later becomes the surprise, no? But the first impression is, I knew it, no? I've been there, no?
So you've been here?
Yes.
Just quickly about the process for the selection. How unusual is that process? And you seem very excited by it. I mean,
yes, it's used. Let's say the European way is much more about competitions. Even, for instance, I've been doing this kind of similar process in Utrecht. That was a kind of shortlist thing, and then at the end we finish in between a competition in between two teams. The classical final doubt that the committees have, should be a team from the place or should be a team from abroad. This kind of Hamlet thing will exist, I'm sure, here. But a kind of committee that in a way wants to know you and your ideas more than a solution, I think is quite special. Maybe it happens with some private clients sometimes, but with institutions it's difficult.
So how is it going to affect the final? How is it going to affect the final result, do you think?
I do not know. They have a very idealistic approach, and they hope that all this kind of process will enrich the let's say the building and the building ideas. That depends very much on them. How much able are the committee, which is really the only group that has been following the process, how are able to reflect that in a document that is useful for working and thinking. I think doesn't matter how much things we said, everything is in their hands.
Right.
We'll be the responsible and the authors. So.
That's great.